Hey everyone, welcome back. Before we dive in, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment telling us where you're tuning in from and what time you're watching. It really helps YouTube keep sending you more stories like this. Alright, let's get started. When I look back now, I realize I had ignored my instincts from the very beginning. I told myself moving to Denver was bound to feel unsettling, that the weight in my stomach was nothing more than the stress of starting over. After all, I had just left behind the tiny duplex in Fort Collins where I had raised my son Ethan for nearly a decade on my own. At 34, I thought I was finally finding some stability, a clean slate. The rental house on Oak Ridge Lane wasn't much. Faded yellow paint peeling from the trim, weeds swallowing the fence, and doors that looked like they belonged in a museum more than a home. But it was cheap, close to my new office job downtown, and most importantly, Ethan finally had his own room. He'd painted the ceiling blue and called it his sky room. For the first week, it almost felt right. Quiet, too quiet. That's when I met Jerry Miles, the neighbor to our left. Mid-40s, thinning hair, always in the same flannel, no matter the season. The first time I saw him, I was juggling grocery bags. He leaned against the mailbox, cigarette dangling, and said, "Heavy load for a pretty lady." His tone was steady, too steady, leaving me unsure if it was meant as a compliment or something else entirely. I gave a polite nod and went inside. When I mentioned it to Daniel, my boyfriend who had just moved in, he shrugged. "Probably just lonely," he said. "Some guys don't know how to talk to people." But Jerry's presence grew heavier. He was always outside when I pulled into the driveway, staring. Not the harmless kind of neighborly glance, but a stare that lingered too long. He asked too many questions. What hours I worked, when Ethan's school let out. I lied, making Ethan sound older than he was, just so Jerry wouldn't know too much. Daniel told me I was imagining things, but my gut screamed otherwise. 2 weeks in, something happened that stripped away any illusion of safety. We came home from a late grocery run, and the back door was cracked open. I froze in the entryway, clutching Ethan's hand. Daniel brushed past me, insisting he must have forgotten to lock it. But I knew I hadn't even touched that door in days. Dents in the frame around the lock confirmed what I feared. Someone had tried to force it. That night, I dragged a chair in front of the doorknob and slept with Ethan curled against me. After that, things escalated. Small items vanished. My necklace, Ethan's action figure, Daniel's wallet. At first, I thought it was just moving chaos. But then the items reappeared in strange places. The necklace in the bathroom sink, the toy under the porch, the wallet shoved inside a cereal box. The worst was the greasy handprint I found on the inside of my bedroom mirror. My knees nearly gave out. Daniel swore it wasn't him, which meant someone else had been close enough to touch the glass where I stood every morning. One evening, while tossing trash, I noticed something sticking out of Jerry's bin. Against better judgment, I pulled it open. Inside, crumpled envelopes with my name, Ethan's missing sweatshirt, and a screwdriver bent just right for prying open a lock. My blood ran cold. I confronted him across the yard, holding the sweatshirt. "Why do you have my son's clothes in your trash?" He only smiled, slow and deliberate. "Could be anyone's. You should be more careful." His casualness was worse than denial, like he wanted me to know. The police came when I called, but after a quick word with him, they returned expressionless. "Without proof, there's not much we can do." "Just keep your doors locked," I wanted to scream. Days later, Daniel went out with friends, leaving me and Ethan alone. Around 10 p.m., boots crunched in the gravel outside. At first, I thought Daniel had returned early, but when I peeked out, 3 men were near the porch. Strangers. One carried a crowbar. I scooped Ethan into my arms and whispered, "Quiet." We slipped out the back, running barefoot across the yard to the opposite neighbor's house. Mrs. Lang, a retired teacher, opened her door to find me pale, trembling, clutching my son. She called the police. By the time officers arrived, the men were gone, but muddy boot prints led straight toward Jerry's property. He denied everything. "People cut through here all the time," he said smoothly. "No arrest, just another useless report." Daniel finally stopped brushing it off after that. He didn't admit it aloud, but the tension in his jaw gave him away. Ethan started crying at night, refusing to sleep unless the lights stayed on. He asked, "What if the bad man comes back?" And I didn't know how to answer. The breaking point came when I dragged our trash bin back from the curb. Sticking from Jerry's can was a folded paper, my name written in block letters. Inside, in jagged handwriting, "I like watching you when you sleep." I nearly collapsed. That night, Daniel packed a bag without another word. At sunrise, we left with whatever we could fit in the car. Ethan clutched his stuffed bear in the back seat. I never looked at Jerry's house as we pulled away, though I could feel his eyes, even in memory. We broke the lease. Money was tight for months, but peace of mind mattered more than any deposit. It's been years now, and sometimes I still wake to phantom footsteps on gravel or dream of greasy fingerprints on mirrors. But more than fear, I carry a truth. Instincts exist for a reason. Too often, we're told to downplay danger, to stay polite, to convince ourselves we're paranoid. But safety will always matter more than appearances, and if something feels wrong, it probably is. I've always been the type of person who saw change as a clean slate. When I finished my English literature degree in 2020, I told myself Seattle was going to be my city. I had grown up in a small town in Idaho, where opportunities dried up before they began, and the only cultural events were high school plays in gymnasiums or half-empty libraries hosting poetry nights. So when I landed my first real job at a small publishing house in Seattle, I packed everything into my beat-up Honda Civic. Boxes of books, journals, half-finished manuscripts, even a mattress strapped precariously to the roof. The drive west was filled with nervous excitement. I was sure life was finally beginning. But reality came quick. Rent in Seattle was brutal. Even the tiniest studio cost more than half my paycheck. I scrolled endlessly through listings until one caught my eye. Roommate wanted. Loft near Capitol Hill. Affordable. Good energy. I hesitated. Too good to be true. But when I met Hannah Blake, the nursing student already living there, my doubts faded. She was outgoing, sharp-witted and warm in a way that made you feel like you'd known her for years. She showed me the loft, high ceilings, exposed brick, wide windows that caught the evening glow. I fell for it instantly. "You're a writer, right?" Hannah asked, glancing at the journals stacked in my arms. "Yeah, mostly late at night. It helps me unwind." "Perfect. I'm gone most nights for hospital shifts. You'll basically have the place to yourself." I signed the lease the same afternoon. Moving in was chaos, but Hannah helped, holding the ladder while I strung fairy lights, suggesting where my desk might go. She even thumbed through my sketches and notes, asking thoughtful questions. For the first time in a long while, I felt a little less lonely. Then came Eric, her boyfriend. At first, he seemed decent. Quiet, polite, always fixing something, tightening the bathroom faucet, carrying groceries up the stairs. I figured he was around so often because their relationship was serious. But slowly, I noticed the way his eyes lingered where we talked. Too long. Too intent. One evening, as he leaned against the counter, he asked, "So, what time do you usually get home from work?" I shrugged. "Depends. Sometimes late." "Why?" "Just curious. This neighborhood can get sketchy." Another time, he laughed lightly and asked, "Do you sleep with your door locked?" The question was delivered like a joke, but the hairs on my neck rose. I brushed it off, telling myself I was paranoid. Maybe he was just awkward. But then little things started happening. My journals, which I stacked neatly, were shifted around. Pages I never shared were left open. My favorite wool scarf, gifted by my grandmother before college, disappeared. I tore apart the apartment searching. Days later, it reappeared, folded carefully on my bed. When I told Hannah, she chuckled. "Leah, you've been so busy and distracted. Between your job and writing all night, I'm not surprised you misplaced it." Maybe she was right, but my gut whispered otherwise. By November, the unease curdled into fear. One night I woke around 3 a.m. The only light was the faint glow of the street lamp through the blinds. At first, I thought I had dreamed the sound that woke me. Then I heard it again, slow, steady breathing that wasn't mine. My eyes adjusted. There, in the doorway, stood Eric. "Eric," my voice cracked, half whisper, half plea. He didn't answer. He just stood there, watching. Then, without a word, he stepped backward into the shadows. I heard his footsteps fade down the hall. I sat frozen until dawn, then locked my door and pressed my weight against it. The next morning, I confronted Hannah. He was in my room, watching me. Her eyes widened in disbelief. "No, Eric wouldn't do that. You must have been dreaming." I wasn't. I saw him. "You've been under so much stress. New city, new job. It's probably affecting your sleep." Her voice was gentle but sharp underneath, defensive. It felt less like comfort and more like accusation. By the end of the conversation, she had me doubting myself. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was a shadow. But my body remembered the fear. Weeks later, after a late shift at the publishing house, I came home to something worse. My bedroom door creaked open, and every canvas, every unfinished page of mine had been rearranged. They leaned against the wall, all turned toward my bed like an audience, and on my pillow lay my missing scarf, drenched in cologne. Eric's. My chest locked up. I shoved everything back, crammed the scarf deep in my closet, and tried again to tell Hannah. She folded her arms. "You're making him sound like some creep, and he's not. He's been nothing but helpful." "Helpful?" I snapped. "You think it's helpful to leave my scarf on my bed reeking of his cologne?" Her cheeks flushed. "You need sleep, Leah." It was useless. I started locking my door every night, wedging a chair against it. Sleep became impossible. Every creak of the loft made me flinch. Then came the night Hannah was on a hospital shift. I came home, bone-tired, only wanting sleep. But when I opened my bedroom door, the world tilted. Every wall was plastered with photos, hundreds of them. Some pulled from my social media, others taken on the streets of Seattle. Me walking to work, me sipping coffee, me browsing at a bookstore. But the worst were the ones clearly taken inside the loft. Me brushing my hair, me asleep in bed. I staggered back, pulse roaring in my ears. That's when I heard him. Eric's voice, low and steady. right behind me. You're even more beautiful when you don't know I'm watching. I spun, but he was already stepping closer, his face calm, almost tender. Something primal took over. I bolted past him, down the hall, into the stairwell. I locked myself inside and screamed until neighbors rushed out. Someone called 911. By the time the police arrived, Eric was gone. I told them everything, the staring, the missing belongings, the photos. But when they searched, the walls were bare. Every single photo had vanished. "Do you have any proof?" one officer asked gently. Tears blurred my vision. They were everywhere. "You must have taken them before you got here." Hannah arrived in her scrubs, her face a storm of anger and disbelief. "Eric wouldn't do that. You're making him into some stalker, and he's not like that." I stared at her, choking on fury and fear. "He was in my room." He covered my walls with photos. "How can you not believe me?" But she only shook her head, muttering about paranoia. That night, I packed. I left behind furniture, notebooks, even half my clothes. I crammed what I could into my Civic and drove until exhaustion forced me into a motel on the edge of town. The next morning, I called my parents. My mother cried. My father swore he'd drive to Seattle that same day. I begged them not to. Within a week, I found a sublet, a shoebox apartment, overpriced, but with strong locks and neighbors who kept to themselves. I never told Hannah where I'd gone. For months, every sound behind me made my body stiffen, every shadow stretched too long. I double-checked every lock, every window. I never saw Eric again. But sometimes, when I write late into the night, I still glance at my door, half expecting to see him standing there, silent, watching. Sometimes, the most dangerous people are the ones invited into our lives under the cover of trust. Leah's story is a reminder. Instincts exist for a reason. Ignore them, and the cost may be more than you're willing to pay. I never imagined I'd be the kind of person who had to run away from someone. But that's exactly what brought me to Raleigh, North Carolina, in the autumn of 2021. My relationship hadn't just ended, it had detonated. Screaming matches that rattled the walls, accusations flung like knives, doors slammed so hard I thought the hinges would tear off. Then came the betrayal, the kind that rewrites every memory you thought was safe, leaving you with nothing but ash. For months, I stayed in the apartment we had once shared, crying until my body felt hollow, trying to live among the ghosts of us. Eventually, I couldn't anymore. I needed air that didn't carry his scent, walls that didn't hold our fights. That's how I found myself on Garrison Street, standing in front of a squat brick apartment complex with ivy crawling up its sides. The building looked tired, older than me. But when I stepped into the second-floor unit at the corner, I felt a strange sort of peace. It wasn't glamorous. Scuffed floors, a bathroom mirror spotted with age. But it had character. The little balcony overlooked the street, and the living room had a wide, drafty window where I imagined myself sitting with a mug of coffee and grading papers. I told myself this was where I would start over. This was where I would write again. Writing had always been the only place I felt steady. At first, life fell into a quiet rhythm. I walked to the middle school where I taught English, spent afternoons filling my journal with fragments of stories. and came home to a silence that felt like healing rather than punishment. I even filled the balcony with potted plants, basil, lavender, succulents, anything green that made the space feel like mine. But then the little thing started. The blinds I knew I had drawn at night would be cracked open by morning. My bottle of lotion, always centered neatly on the dresser, would be tilted to the side. A stack of graded essays I'd left perfectly squared on the table was scattered as though someone had rifled through them. I told myself it was stress. The breakup had left me raw, distracted, forgetful. Surely I was just misremembering. That explanation worked until one Friday when I came home from work and saw it. The lock on my bedroom window bent. The metal warped, pried open by something stronger than a draft. My stomach dropped. I called the landlord immediately. He arrived half an hour later, coffee in hand, looking more irritated than concerned. "Old place," he said, tapping the warped frame with his knuckle. "Been here since the 60s. Wood swells, locks loosen, nothing to lose sleep over." He replaced the latch in 5 minutes and left with a shrug, but my instincts screamed otherwise. That night, I shoved my dresser against the window just so I could sleep. The first time I thought I saw him, I convinced myself it was exhaustion. I was in bed, scrolling through my phone, the blue glow painting the walls. Out of the corner of my eye, I swore I saw a figure standing in the far corner of the room, darker than the shadows themselves. I snapped the lamp on. Nothing. My pulse wouldn't slow for an hour. I told myself it was my mind playing tricks. 2 days later, I sat at my desk grading essays when I glanced out the window. My breath froze. Across the street, in the top floor of the abandoned brick warehouse, a man stood at the window, perfectly still, perfectly silent, watching me. I blinked hard, certain my eyes were deceiving me. That warehouse had been empty for months. The landlord himself had told me the upper floors were unsafe, locked up because of severe water damage. I called him again. "Someone's in the old warehouse. I just saw him. He's staring at my window." "Impossible," he said flatly. "That place is sealed. Keys are locked away. You're under a lot of stress, Claire." "Get some rest," I wanted to scream. That night, every noise in the building rattled inside me. The pipes knocking, doors slamming down the hall, footsteps overhead even though no one was supposed to live above me. And then at 2:17 a.m., as I was drifting, I heard it, a faint tapping against my bedroom window. I froze. I lived on the second floor. There was nothing outside but open air and a narrow alley. No tree branches, no fire escape, nothing. My breath shallow, I crept to the blinds and peeled them back. Nothing but night and the weak glow of a street lamp. I collapsed into bed, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. But in the morning, when sunlight spilled across the glass, I saw it. Words written in the condensation by a finger. "I like your laugh." My knees buckled. I called the police immediately. 2 officers arrived, casual, unconcerned. They searched the apartment, checked the windows, and found nothing. "Could be a prank," one said. "On the second floor," I snapped. "Who climbs 2 stories just to write that?" "Condensation patterns can look strange. You've had a rough time. Stress plays tricks." That word again. Stress. Like it was a spell meant to make me question myself. When they left, I shoved furniture against the door and sat awake all night. I needed proof, something undeniable. It came the following Saturday. I had been cleaning, desperate for a sense of control. When I bent to pick up a notebook that had slipped behind my bed, my fingers brushed something hard, something that wasn't mine. I pulled it out, a tiny black camera, the red light blinking. The scream that tore out of me didn't sound human. I ran barefoot into the hall, the camera clutched in my shaking hand. My neighbor cracked her door open, startled. "Claire, are you okay?" "No," I whispered, my throat raw. "Someone's been inside my apartment." The police came again. This time I shoved the device into their hands. "This is proof. He's been here. He's watching me." The younger officer frowned, turning the camera over. "Looks like a nanny cam." "It was under my bed," I shouted. "I live alone." They exchanged glances, scribbled notes, but I could see it in their eyes. They still didn't believe me. That night, I didn't bother packing properly. I stuffed a few clothes and my laptop into a bag and fled. I didn't even lock the door. I drove until I found a cheap motel by the highway, where I sat on the bed staring at the peeling wallpaper and shaking with every sound in the hall. I never went back. I called the landlord, broke the lease, and didn't give him the chance to argue. Within a week, I found a smaller, overpriced apartment across town with fresh locks and heavier doors. The first night there, I slept with every light on. But healing wasn't instant. Even now, months later, I still catch myself checking notebooks twice to make sure no one's touched them. I glance at windows longer than I should. I no longer scatter my writing across the table. I lock it away. I never found out who he was or how long he had seen slipping inside my home. I never learned how he reached my window or whether the man in the warehouse and the man behind the camera were the same. What I know is this: for weeks, maybe months, someone lived inside the edges of my life, unseen but always present, and he only left when I did. Safety isn't guaranteed by walls or locks. It's an illusion that comforts us until someone decides to step through it. And if your instincts whisper that something is wrong, listen. Because the cost of doubting yourself is far worse than the fear of being mistaken. I never imagined that the end of a relationship could unravel my life so completely. But in the spring of 2014, that's exactly what happened. After nearly 5 years with the man I thought was my future, I found myself dragging boxes into a cramped one-bedroom apartment on the north side of Denver. The place wasn't glamorous. The carpet was worn thin. The kitchen cabinet smelled faintly of bleach and old food, and the radiator hissed like it was always angry. But it was mine, and that felt like a start. I was 27, working as a graphic designer for a mid-sized firm, and the only coping mechanism I knew was to throw myself into work. I stayed at the office late, rearranging fonts and color palettes until my eyes blurred. When I finally got home, I rarely cooked. Delivery became my lifeline. Chinese takeout, greasy tacos, cheap pizza. Food felt easier than facing silence. That's how I met Ethan. The first time he showed up with a paper bag of pad thai, I didn't think much of it. He was young, maybe late 20s, tall with a grin that looked practiced but polite. "Rough night?" he asked lightly as he handed me the order. I nodded, fumbling for cash. His friendliness seemed ordinary, forgettable. But the next week it happened again. Different restaurant, same driver. He chuckled, saying, You work late a lot, don't you? I paused. The way he said it felt strange, like he'd been keeping track. Still, I brushed it off, offered a half smile, and shut the door. Over time, though, I noticed a pattern. No matter what app I used or where I ordered from, Ethan always seemed to be the one standing at my door. Sometimes he'd wave with a kind of familiarity, like we were old friends. Other times, his eyes darted past me, scanning the layout of my apartment. Once, while handing me a box of noodles, he said, "You've got a presentation tomorrow, don't you?" My stomach tightened. I hadn't told anyone, not even my co-workers, that I was nervous about presenting the next day. "How would you know that?" I asked, half joking, though my throat felt dry. He smiled faintly. "You just look like the type who stays up late prepping." That night I couldn't shake the unease. I double-checked my curtains, locked every window. I told myself he was just observant, just friendly, just coincidence. But then the deliveries started arriving when I hadn't ordered anything. The first time I opened my door one morning to find a brown paper bag on the mat. Inside was a breakfast burrito, still warm, but no receipt, no name. I chalked it up to a mix-up. The next day, another bag appeared. This time, a slice of cake with a note tucked inside. "You work too hard. Sweet things help." The handwriting was clean block letters in black ink. My chest tightened. Nobody knew how hard I worked. Nobody but him. Within a week, groceries started showing up. Milk, bread, pasta, with my name scrawled neatly on the side. That night, I called my best friend, Marissa. "I think my delivery driver is watching me," I whispered. "You're joking," she said, half laughing. "I'm not. He leaves me food, groceries, notes. It's too much." Her voice grew sharp. "Listen, Claire, that's not normal. You need to go to the police before this escalates. I promised I would, but I didn't. It felt silly. Reporting free food, a stranger's kindness." Still, the unease deepened. Then came the night I walked into my apartment and knew someone had been inside. The moment I stepped in, I froze. On my small dining table sat a takeout box, steam clinging to the lid. But what stopped my breath were the candle flickering beside it, and my Bluetooth speaker quietly playing music. I hadn't left it on. Every instinct screamed at me. My eyes darted to the door. Locked, windows too, no sign of forced entry. My hands shook as I called Marissa. "He's been inside," I whispered. "Claire, hang up and call 911, now." The officers arrived within 20 minutes. They walked through my apartment, checked the locks, glanced at the candles and food. "No forced entry," one officer said flatly. "Maybe you forgot to lock up." "Could be a prank, I didn't," I snapped, but he was already jotting notes with disinterest. When they left, the silence in the apartment was unbearable. I sat awake the whole night, staring at the food box glowing faintly in the dark. The next evening, as I curled on the couch, my phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. "Don't cancel our date." My blood ran cold. I hadn't given my number to anyone new. I leapt up, checking every lock again, scanning every corner of the apartment. That's when I noticed it. Another bag sitting on the couch. My heart stuttered. I hadn't heard the door. Inside the bag wasn't food. It was a photograph. Me, from the night before. Sitting on that very couch, scrolling my phone, completely unaware. I dropped it, bolted into the hall, and banged on Marissa's door. She opened in pajamas, eyes wide as I spilled everything out between sobs. "You're not staying there another night," she said firmly. We went to the police again, this time with the photo and text. The detective listened more carefully, but his questions stung. Did I know Ethan's last name? Had I given him a key? Was I sure it was him? "I'm not imagining this," I said sharply. "He's been inside more than once." The detective promised to look into it. Promises didn't help me sleep. I bought cameras, one by the door, one in the living room, one in the bedroom. For a brief moment, I felt safer. That ended 2 nights later at 2:43 a.m. My phone buzzed with a motion alert. I opened the feed, heart pounding, and there he was. Ethan, standing in my living room doorway, his face illuminated by the camera's glow, staring directly into the lens. In his hand, a piece of paper. He raised it slowly. "Let me in." I scrambled for my phone, dialing 911 with trembling hands. "He's here." "He's inside." By the time sirens wailed outside, the apartment was empty. The detective's tone the next morning was grim. "You need to leave. Tonight. Stay with family. A friend. Anyone. He's escalating and we don't know what he's capable of." So I did. I left everything, furniture, dishes, even the cameras, and moved into my sister's house across town. Weeks later, I officially broke my lease. Ethan had vanished by then. No arrest, no explanation, just a suffocating absence. It's been nearly a decade since then, but the memory hasn't left me. I live in another city now with a roommate, because silence no longer comforts me. It warns me. I never order delivery anymore. When a stranger smiles too warmly, I feel my pulse spike. Sometimes I tell myself he's gone, that the police scared him off, or he moved away, or maybe found someone else to fixate on. Other nights I lie awake, convinced he's still out there, waiting for the right moment to reappear. Because sometimes danger doesn't break down your door. It knocks softly, hands you dinner, smiles like a friend, until you let it in without realizing it never needed permission in the first place. When I think back to the summer of 1998, it comes to me in flashes of sunlight, scraped knees, and that dizzying kind of freedom you only get once in your life. I was 13, caught between childhood and adolescence, always tugging at the hem of my shirts, convinced everyone was staring at me even when they weren't. That summer, my parents finally decided I was old enough to ride my bike around our neighborhood in Fairview, Ohio, as long as I promised not to cross the busy intersection at Maple Avenue or wander too far. My bike was my pride, an emerald green Huffy with chrome handlebars and a dented basket I decorated with stickers. Riding it felt like flying. I'd circle the blocks again and again, hair whipping into my eyes, the little tape player in my pocket skipping whenever I hit a bump. For the first time, the world felt bigger, like maybe I was stretching into something new. At first, it was all ordinary. The corner store with its soda machines humming on the sidewalk. The baseball field where older kids played until the sky went purple. The neat rows of ranch houses that looked identical except to the families inside them. I loved the routine of it. Then I noticed him. The first time didn't feel strange. He was tall, maybe late 30s or early 40s, with graying hair tucked under a battered Cleveland Indians cap. A black Labrador padded along beside him, tongue lolling, tail swishing. As I pedaled by, he smiled and said, "Nice ride." I smiled back because that's what I'd been taught. Be polite, be respectful, keep moving. The next day, he was there again. Same spot, near the shuttered laundromat at the edge of town. "Warm one today, huh?" he called. I nodded, gripping the handlebars a little tighter. After a week, it was impossible not to notice. He always seemed to be there when I rode. Always with the dog, always smiling. Then came the questions. What grade are you in? Which school? You live around here, don't you? My answers were clumsy, clipped. My parents had raised me to be polite to adults, but something about the way his eyes lingered made my stomach knot. One afternoon, as I slowed at the corner, he tugged the leash and said, "You know, there's a back way behind the laundromat. Leads straight to the strip mall. Safer than that main road." My heart skipped. I knew those streets like the back of my hand. There was no shortcut behind the laundromat, just a chain-link fence and an overgrown lot. His smile stretched too wide, like he wanted me to believe him. Every instinct screamed at me. I nodded stiffly and pedaled hard until my legs burned. That night at dinner, I mentioned it casually, the way kids do when they don't know their words carry weight. "Some guy with a dog told me there's a shortcut by the laundromat," I mumbled, pushing peas around my plate. My mom froze mid-bite. My dad's fork clattered against the table. "What guy?" my mom asked sharply. I shrugged. "Just some man walking his dog. He always says hi." Her face tightened. "What else did he say?" I repeated the words. My mom's jaw clenched. "From now on," she said firmly, "you don't ride alone." The next day, she laced up her sneakers and told me she was walking with me. "For exercise," she said, but I knew better. This wasn't about fitness. This was about him. Sure enough, there he was. Same spot, same dog. His smile faltered when he saw my mother beside me. "Afternoon?" he said casually, pulling the leash tight. "Why are you talking to my daughter?" my mom demanded, her voice like steel. He chuckled softly. "Just being neighborly. My dog likes watching her ride by. She's got a nice bike." "Don't talk to her again," my mom snapped. For a heartbeat, the smile vanished. His eyes went cold, sharp. Then he muttered, "Fine," and walked off. That night, long after I was in bed, I overheard my parents in the kitchen. Their voices were hushed, urgent. "Registered offender," my mom whispered. "I told you he'd slip. The police say unless he does something..." My dad's voice trailed off, heavy with frustration. The words sank into me like ice. I didn't fully understand, but I knew enough. The next morning, my bike leaned untouched against the wall. My freedom was gone overnight. Still, I saw him. Not up close, not with words anymore, but in glimpses. Across the street near the bus stop, sitting on a bench outside the corner store. Always with that dog. Always watching. One sticky Saturday, I begged my mum to let me ride, promising I'd stay within sight of the house. Reluctantly, she agreed, standing on the porch as I circled. I pushed the pedals harder, desperate to feel that rush again. And then I saw him. He stood at the far end of the street, leaning against a fence. No smile this time, just watching. My mom must have seen him too, because she shouted my name, her voice sharp with panic. I yanked the handlebars, tires squealing as I bolted back toward her. By the time I turned, he was gone. That night, my dad sat me down. His voice was steady, serious. If you ever see him again, you come straight home. Don't answer, don't wave, don't even look at him. Do you understand?" I nodded, throat tight. It felt unfair, like he had stolen something from me without ever touching me. The summer dragged on. I saw less of him, though sometimes I thought I spotted the dog across a parking lot or at the edge of a crowd. Whether he'd moved on or been scared off, I didn't know. But the damage was done. The bike gathered dust. The streets I'd loved felt smaller, haunted. Years later, driving through Fairview as an adult, I slowed at the old laundromat. The windows were still boarded up. The baseball field was cracked and weedy. Kids zipped past on bikes, laughing, carefree. For a moment, I envied them. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a man walking a black lab. My hands tightened on the wheel, heart hammering, even though I knew it couldn't be him after all these years. But the instinct remained. Look away. Speed up. Get distance. That summer of 1998 taught me something I never forgot. Freedom is fragile, and sometimes it only takes one stranger to steal it from you. Predators don't always look dangerous. Sometimes they wear baseball caps, walk friendly dogs, and smile like harmless neighbors. And that's why, even now, I never ignore the feeling that something isn't right. When I first moved to Chicago in the winter of 2017, it felt like stepping into another life. I'd just turned 21, beginning my third year at the university. And for the first time, I had a space of my own. A narrow dorm room on the fourth floor of a building that always smelled faintly of burnt toast and floor polish. My parents' bitter separation had happened the year before, and both of them still called often, asking for reassurance, urging me to pick sides. But in Chicago, surrounded by endless streets and icy winds, I found the distance I didn't realize I craved. I filled my days with literature classes, long afternoons in cozy coffee shops, and solitary walks along Lake Michigan with the wind cutting against my face. I wasn't someone who thrived in large groups or at crowded parties. My world was small. My 2 roommates and a co-worker from the independent bookstore a few blocks from campus, where I worked part-time. That shop was my safe place. The dust of forgotten shelves, the quiet order of books, the soft hum of people browsing while the city outside thundered past. So when Professor Carver announced that our semester would include a long-term group project, my stomach clenched. I hated group work, the endless coordination, the awkward messages, the imbalance of effort. When my name was read alongside Adrian Miller's, I didn't react. I didn't even know who he was. After class, he approached me. He extended his hand with practiced politeness, smiling in a way that seemed rehearsed. Adrian was tall, with dark hair neatly parted. The kind of student who looked like he belonged in student government or debate club. His voice was steady, his tone assured. "Clara, right? I've seen you in lectures. You take really detailed notes." Heat rose to my cheeks. Yeah, I guess." "Good," he said with a confident nod. "I'm organized too. This will be easy at first." He was everything I'd hoped for in a partner. He volunteered to pull references from the library, emailed me detailed outlines, and insisted we split the work evenly. I told my roommate how relieved I was. Finally, someone responsible. Our first few study sessions were perfectly normal. We met in the library, laptops open, papers scattered. But then I noticed things. The way his gaze lingered just a second too long. How he always seemed to know when I was free, even before I said so. His small remarks. On the way, I stirred sugar into my coffee. The doodles in the margins of my notes. The way I pushed my hair back when I was concentrating. I brushed it off. Maybe he was just observant. Then the late-night texts began. At first, they were about the project. Did you finish chapter 5? Should I start the outline? Then they shifted. That sweater looked good on you today. You always laugh at Professor Carver's jokes. It's cute, I replied sparingly. Thanks. Yeah. Sometimes I didn't reply at all, but when I went silent, he'd follow up. Did I upset you? You seem distant. I told myself he was harmless, maybe just socially awkward. Still, something unsettled me. The first true jolt came one Tuesday night. I just closed the bookstore, the smell of paper and espresso clinging to my hands. Back at my dorm, I opened my backpack to grab my keys and froze. In the outer pocket was a notebook that wasn't mine. I flipped it open. My stomach dropped. Every page was filled with handwriting. My handwriting, my notes, my doodles, even half-finished quotes from class. But it wasn't my notebook. It was Adrian's. He had copied everything. In the margins, his words crawled like insects across the page. We're the same. I understand you. No one else gets you like I do. My fingers went numb. He had been inside my bag. The next day, I confronted him in the library. I set the notebook between us. Why do you have this? He smiled, calm, unbothered. I just thought it was cute. You take notes like me. I wanted to keep track. You can't go through my stuff, I snapped, my voice trembling. Adrian tilted his head, almost amused. Clara, relax. You're overreacting. The ease in his tone made me want to scream, but the library was too quiet, too full of watching eyes. I packed my things and left. That same week, my social media accounts were hacked. My passwords stopped working. Photos began circulating, private ones. Me in pajamas, FaceTiming my mom. A picture of me and my roommate curled up watching a movie. Images I had never posted anywhere. My roommates thought I'd been careless. You probably use the same password for everything, one of them said. I didn't argue, but inside, I knew who it was. I cut him off completely. No texts, no meetings outside class. I thought silence would make him stop. It didn't. One Thursday night after midnight, I returned from the library exhausted. The hallway lights flickered as I reached my dorm. My door was slightly ajar. My chest tightened. Inside, nothing looked disturbed, except for a single white rose resting across the book I'd left on my desk. I stumbled backward, nearly falling. My roommate ran over asking what was wrong. I couldn't speak. We called campus security. The cameras were conveniently down for maintenance. No record of anyone entering. When I told the officer I suspected Adrian, he shook his head. He's a top student. Works with professors all the time. Are you sure you're not imagining things? The disbelief was sharper than the fear. If no one believed me, what protection did I have? For weeks, I lived in dread. Lights on all night, jumps at every shadow, but my silence didn't shield me. The breaking point came on a stormy Saturday. I left the bookstore late, umbrella useless against the wind. The streets were slick, deserted. Footsteps echoed behind me. I told myself it was another student, But when I sped up, the steps followed. My pulse thundered. I ducked into a diner, the bell above the door shrill in the silence. I slid into a booth, trying to steady my breath, and then I saw him. Through the rain-streaked window, Adrian stood. No umbrella, no jacket, just staring, still, expressionless, water dripping down his face, but his eyes never blinking. My throat tightened. For the first time, I knew I was in real danger. That night, I filed a police report. My hands shook as I described everything. The notebook, the hacking, the rose, the stalking. The officer nodded, wrote things down, promised to investigate. But nothing changed. Adrian still came to class, still smiled, still played the role of the perfect student. Even my professor looked baffled when I told her. Adrian? One of my brightest. I'm sure this is some misunderstanding. The isolation was worse than the fear. It felt like shouting into a void. Then, just as suddenly, he was gone. 1 week he was answering questions in class. The next, his seat was empty. Rumors swirled. He transferred. He moved. His family relocated. No one knew, but I did. He was still out there. Years later, I'm still in Chicago. I still work at the bookstore, now as a manager. My life looks normal. Quiet mornings with coffee, long days among shelves, evenings in my apartment. But peace is a mask. I check my locks twice every night. I keep my curtains drawn. I avoid walking alone after dark. Some friends say I should move on, that he was just a college kid with a crush. But they never saw his face through that rain-streaked window. They never read the words scrawled in the margins of my stolen notes. No one else gets you like I do. Obsession hides behind politeness, charm, and the mask of normalcy. Warnings are too often dismissed because the danger doesn't fit the stereotype. But instincts matter. If something feels wrong, it usually is. Trusting your gut can be the difference between being silenced and being safe. I never imagined I'd be back on dating apps at 29. But when you spend nearly 4 years building a future with someone, only to watch it collapse in a single night, loneliness doesn't just sneak in, it floods every corner of your life. Seattle winters didn't help. The rain seemed endless, the sky a dull slate gray that pressed down on you like a weight. The streets were slick and empty, and even the coffee shops buzzing with conversation felt like they belonged to everyone but me. That was my life in January of 2021. My name is Ryan Matthews. Back then, I was a financial analyst with a decent paycheck, a steady routine, and a girlfriend I thought I'd marry. When it ended, the silence of my apartment was unbearable. The hum of my fridge, the faint creak of the walls, everything seemed louder than my own thoughts. That's when I downloaded an app. It was called TrueLink, one of those next-generation dating platforms that promised deeper connections, not shallow swipes. I told myself it was worth a try. What did I have to lose? At first, it was the usual awkwardness. Empty profiles, small talk that fizzled after 2 days. But then came her. Her name was Maya. Her first message stopped me cold. "Do you still listen to the Lunar Echoes?" I hadn't heard anyone mention that band in a decade. They were my obsession in high school, a little-known West Coast group that maybe 100 of us ever cared about. I almost laughed out loud. My reply came instantly. From there, it was as if every conversation unlocked another coincidence. She loved the same cult movies I quoted, dropped references to the same arcade games I'd wasted summers on, even admitted she owned a collection of ridiculous, oversized mugs for her coffee. I told myself it was rare, magical even, to find someone who overlapped with me so perfectly. We started messaging every night, long threads, inside jokes, even the occasional late-night call, but never video. Whenever I suggested FaceTime, she brushed it off. I looked terrible on camera. I hate video. I'm too shy, I didn't push. After the breakup, I just wanted someone to fill the silence, and Maya did that better than anyone else. At first, I didn't notice the small details she slipped into conversation. How she knew I tapped my pen against my desk when I was anxious. How she said she loved the way my voice went hoarse when I was tired. I assumed I'd told her more than I realized. Loneliness makes you overshare. That's what I told myself, until the garlic incident. It was a rainy Tuesday night. I'd just come home, soaked through despite my umbrella. Cooking was my therapy, my attempt to hold on to normalcy. I tossed garlic into a pan, stirring lazily as steam clouded my glasses. My phone buzzed. A message from Maya. Don't burn the garlic again. I froze. The wooden spoon slipped from my hand, clattering against the pan. My heart hammered in my chest. I hadn't told her I was cooking. I hadn't mentioned garlic. The last time I burned it was weeks ago, and I'd never shared that with anyone. I typed back, "What do you mean?" Her reply came instantly. Just teasing. You told me once, but I knew I hadn't. That night I barely slept, convincing myself it was a lucky guess, a coincidence, anything but what it felt like. A week later, things escalated. I was dozing off in bed, phone in hand, when a notification buzzed. A new message from Maya. It was a photo of me, asleep, taken from the foot of my bed. I bolted upright, my pulse roaring in my ears. My apartment was silent. Shadows stretched long across the walls. I tore through every room, yanking open closets, pulling back the shower curtain, even checking under the bed like a terrified child. Nothing. But someone had been there. The next morning, I didn't go to work. I tore my apartment apart instead. Every shelf, every drawer, every corner. That's when I found it. A pinhole camera, no bigger than a button, hidden between the spines of books on my shelf. Another inside the air vent. My hands shook as I ripped them out. Cords snapping. How long had they been there? By noon, I was standing in the Seattle police precinct, clutching a shoebox full of cameras like a lifeline. The officer barely looked up. Dating apps, sometimes. Could be a scammer, he muttered. No, I insisted. She knows things she shouldn't. She sent me a picture of myself in bed. That means someone was inside my apartment. He sighed, tapping at his keyboard. Without proof it was her, not much we can do. Change your locks, update your passwords. Stay alert, I wanted to scream. Proof? Wasn't this proof? But his disinterested eyes told me everything. That night I locked every window, checked every door twice, and sat in the dark with the shoebox beside me. My phone buzzed once. I didn't look. Hours later, when I finally did, it was her. Why didn't you answer? I stopped sleeping in my bed. Stopped cooking. I lived on takeout containers and restless nights on the couch. Friends noticed my pale face, the way my hands trembled. I lied, saying it was work stress. How could I explain the truth? How do you tell someone a stranger from a dating app might be inside your wall? Maya grew more demanding. constant messages. Questions about where I was, who I was with, why I didn't answer fast enough. I stopped replying, hoping silence would drive her away. Then, one night around 1 a.m., my phone buzzed. "Why are you ignoring me?" I didn't reply. An hour later, "You don't understand. We're perfect together." Another hour. "No one will ever love you like I do." By dawn, I had 30 unread messages. The final one made my blood run cold. "You're cuter when you're scared." That morning, I was gone. I packed a bag in 10 minutes, clothes, laptop, wallet, and left. I didn't tell my job, didn't tell my friends. I checked into a motel under a fake name, paid cash, and sat awake in silence for 3 nights straight. I never went back to that apartment. Within a week, I broke the lease, bought a new phone, deleted every account, every app. My landlord emailed me about forwarding mail. I never replied. It's been years since then, but I still can't shake it. I don't date anymore. I don't trust coincidences. Every time I see an unknown number flash across my phone, every time a shadow flickers near my window, I wonder if it's her. If Maya is still out there. Because she knew too much. And the scariest part, maybe she still does. I used to believe a new house could fix everything. In 1997, I was 13 years old when my family moved into what my parents called our forever home. To me, it looked like something out of a glossy magazine. 2 stories with brick siding, pale blue shutters on the windows, and a backyard that seemed endless compared to our cramped old place. Best of all, there was a pool that shimmered whenever the Texas sun hit it. My dad, Richard, was a history teacher who had spent years coaching after school for extra pay. And my mom, Laura, worked part-time at a veterinary clinic. They were proud of what they'd accomplished, and they wanted us, me and my little sister Megan, who was 10 at the time, to feel proud too. At first, it was everything they promised. Weekend barbecues, pool parties, afternoons riding bikes through the cul-de-sac with other kids. Megan spent entire summer days doing cannonballs until her hair stuck to her face. And Mom finally had space to host her church friends. Dad kept saying it was proof that hard work paid off. For a while, it really did feel like the dream. But dreams don't last. It started small. Mom mentioned she heard footsteps by the pool one night. Dad brushed it off. Probably stray cats, maybe neighbor kids sneaking around. But one morning, my stuffed bear, something I never slept without, was floating face down in the pool. Dad said maybe I left it outside. Maybe the wind carried it. But I knew I hadn't. Then came the letters. The first one was simple, printed on plain white paper. "Lovely family you have." Mom stared at it for a long time before folding it away in a drawer. A week later, another letter appeared. "The boy looks like his father." Dad laughed uncomfortably, said it was probably a prank. But Mom wasn't laughing. She called the police. They said unless the letters contained threats, there wasn't much they could do. That was the first time I realized adults didn't always have the answers. By September, the house didn't feel like home anymore. It felt watched. One evening, Dad came home to find the back door unlocked. Mom swore she had locked it. We searched the whole house, every closet, every corner. Nothing was missing. but the fruit bowl in the kitchen had been rearranged into a perfect little pyramid. None of us did that. That night, Mom's face stayed pale. Dad muttered about her being forgetful, but I noticed his hand shaking as he checked the locks again and again. I started noticing him then. The man across the street, under the street lamp, always in a dark jacket, always standing still, sometimes for hours. I told Dad, but he waved it off. Probably just a neighbor getting fresh air. But when I asked why he stood there every night, Dad didn't answer. Megan began refusing to sleep without a night light. She swore she saw shadows at her window. I didn't believe her, until one night I woke to the crunch of gravel outside. Peeking through my blinds, I saw him. The man in the jacket stood at the edge of our yard. Facing my window, I ducked back and pulled the covers over my head, too terrified to breathe, let alone tell my parents. A week later, Mom found the first Polaroid. She'd gone downstairs for water late at night. When she came back, her hands were trembling, her face white as paper. She woke Dad, then me. She showed us the photo. It was her, sleeping in bed, the sheets, the pillow, everything exactly as it looked hours earlier. Someone had taken it from inside the house. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "They were in here." The police came. They searched every door and window. No signs of forced entry, no broken locks, nothing. One officer even suggested maybe it was staged. A prank. Mom sobbed. Dad demanded more patrols. The officers promised, but their eyes told me they didn't believe us. After that, Dad installed extra locks, motion sensor lights, and a few cameras. But whoever was out there knew how to avoid being caught. The fear seeped into everything. I stopped inviting friends over. Megan slept on my floor most nights. Mom jumped at every creak of the floorboards. And Dad, he tried to act strong, but I saw the way his eyes lingered on the windows, how tired he was from checking locks over and over. The house we once loved had turned into a cage. Glass walls, every move visible to someone we couldn't see. One night, I yanked the blinds wide open and stared directly at the man under the lamp. For a moment, I swear he stared back. Then he turned and walked away, slow, like it didn't matter that I'd seen him. Somehow, that scared me even more. By Halloween, it escalated. Another Polaroid appeared. This one of Megan, asleep in her bed, clutching her nightlight. The photo was left on the living room couch. Mom screamed when she found it. Dad tore through the house again, searching the attic, the crawl space, every corner. Nothing. That was the breaking point. By November, we were gone. There was no dramatic ending, no police catching someone in the act. Just boxes packed in silence, a for sale sign in the yard, and a family too exhausted to stay. We moved to a smaller house across town. No pool, no big backyard. It didn't matter. We just wanted safety. The stalker was never caught. I grew up, went to college, moved states, but I never forgot. Even now, when I drive past two-story suburban homes with pools, my chest tightens. I think of the Polaroids. I think of the way someone stood over us as we slept, snapping pictures, leaving them behind like trophies. And I think about how quickly safety can vanish. The house wasn't safe. Maybe it never was. Home should be the one place where fear doesn't reach. But locks and walls don't guarantee that. Safety requires vigilance. And when something feels wrong, it usually is. Because sometimes the danger isn't outside, it's already inside. was 20, all I wanted was freedom. After years of living under my father's strict rules and my mother's cold silence, I was desperate to get out. In 2015, I finally managed it. I shared a rented house with 3 friends in Austin, Texas. It was nothing fancy. Paint peeling on the walls, floors that creaked if you even breathed wrong, but it was ours. And to me, that was everything. My room was the smallest, wedged into the back of the house. The only window looked out into the backyard, half hidden by overgrown weeds. My friends thought it was depressing, but I didn't mind. That window gave me my secret escape. After long days of college classes and endless assignments, I'd slip outside for a cigarette. The yard smelled faintly of damp earth, the porch light buzzing with dying moths, and I'd sit on a rickety chair, listening to the muted hum of cars far in the distance. It felt like the only time in the day that truly belonged to me. That's when I noticed him, the man next door. At first, nothing about him screamed danger, just strange. He looked mid-30s, tall, messy black hair, and a habit of appearing at the oddest hours. Sometimes I'd see him pacing his backyard at 1 a.m., watering dead plants. Other times just standing at his fence staring out into nothing. But when I smoked, his eyes always seemed to linger too long. One night he finally spoke. "You shouldn't smoke so much," he said softly across the fence. "It'll ruin your smile." The words made my skin crawl. I forced a weak laugh, crushed the cigarette, and muttered thanks before retreating inside. My heart pounded in my chest like I'd been running. I tried to convince myself he was just socially awkward, maybe lonely. But somewhere deep inside I recoiled. A couple of weeks later, one of my roommates, Sasha, mentioned she'd heard rumors about him. Apparently, he'd gotten into a screaming match with some old roommates, cops called and everything. "Guy's got a temper," she whispered. I nodded but didn't say much. From that moment on, every time I stepped outside, I felt his presence like a weight pressing against me. The first time he cornered me was in broad daylight. I was walking to the bus stop, earbuds in but no music playing, my little trick to avoid small talk. I noticed him behind me, a few steps back, pretending to scroll on his phone. My stomach twisted, then he quickened his pace. "Hey," he said, grinning too wide. "I saw you at the coffee shop yesterday. You look beautiful with your hair down." I froze. No one knew I'd been there. He must have followed me. "Please stop watching me," I snapped, my voice sharper than I expected. For just a second, his smile cracked. Then he tilted his head, almost mocking. "I'm not watching. I'm just noticing." I walked away as fast as I could, pulse hammering in my ears. That night I came home and found him sitting on our porch steps, a plastic grocery bag of beer, cans beside him. "Thought I'd wait for you," he said casually, as if that was normal. I darted inside and locked the door, calling my roommate Ryan in a whisper. "He's outside. He's right here." Ryan sighed, annoyed. "He's probably drunk. Don't overthink it. I'll be home soon." But soon was over an hour away. I crouched by my bedroom window, peeking through the blinds. He sat there drinking, muttering to himself, occasionally glancing at the door like he knew I was watching. Nearly an hour later, he finally stumbled away with another man from his house. When he was gone, I rushed out to lock the gate, checking the bolts 3 times over. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped the keys. For a few days, it was quiet. I almost let myself believe it was over. Then the scratching started. It was just past 2 a.m. when I woke up. At first I thought it was tree branches brushing the glass, but no. The sound was too deliberate. Scratch. Pause. Scratch. My chest tightened. I turned slowly toward the window. Through the blinds, I saw the faint outline of a crouched figure. Someone was right outside. I didn't move, didn't breathe. My hand shook as I dialed Ryan. "He's at my window," I whispered. Ryan groaned, half asleep. "It's probably a raccoon. Go back to bed." Tears burned my eyes, but I stayed silent, frozen. The scratching went on for what felt like forever, then stopped. I didn't sleep at all. The next morning, muddy footprints trailed beneath my window. Not animal prints, human. I showed them to my roommates. Nobody said much. We called the police. They nodded politely, scribbled notes, and gave me the same hollow advice. Stay alert. Don't be alone with him. As if staying alert could erase the prints under my window. From then on, I stopped smoking outside. I locked my blinds tight. I planned every walk so I wouldn't come home alone, but the fear followed me everywhere. At the grocery store, I'd feel eyes on me. On the bus, I'd catch sight of messy black hair 2 rows back. Sometimes it wasn't him at all, just my mind playing tricks, but my body didn't care. The fear felt the same. One evening, I came home to find a single beer can on the porch, upright, waiting, no note, no explanation. I didn't touch it. That night, I slept in Ryan's room with the door locked. By early summer, I couldn't take it anymore. My friends thought I was overreacting, dramatic even, but I didn't care. Broke the lease, packed my things and left. I told them I wanted a new start, that Austin wasn't for me. The truth was simpler. I couldn't live in constant fear anymore. I moved into a tiny apartment across the city. The walls were thin, neighbors loud, but I didn't care. For the first time in months, I slept with the blinds open just an inch, telling myself I had nothing to hide. But the fear never really left. Even now, years later, in a completely different state, I sometimes wake at 2 a.m., heart pounding, convinced I hear scratching at my window. And maybe it's nothing, maybe it's just memory. But deep down, I know the truth. Once you've lived with someone at your door, watching, waiting, you never really forget. Evil doesn't always wear a mask or break into your house. Sometimes it smiles over a fence. Sometimes it lives next door. And the worst mistake you can make, believing your fear is an overreaction. Your instincts are warnings. Always listen. I used to think the wilderness meant freedom, a place untouched by rules, where the noise of life couldn't reach me. Since senior year of high school, Marcus and I had made it our tradition. Every winter, we'd head into the backcountry, pack up our gear, and disappear for a few nights. No buzzing phones, no deadlines, no people. Just the sound of wind brushing through bare branches and the comfort of firelight against the cold. By 2009, I was 23 and working long shifts at a machine shop in Boise, Idaho. My life had become an endless loop. Metal shavings, oil stains, fluorescent lights, and a body that ached more than it should have for my age. Marcus, a year older, had just started working as a junior forest officer, a job he'd dreamed of for years. He lived and breathed the outdoors. When he suggested keeping our tradition alive that winter, I didn't hesitate. I couldn't have known then that trip would change everything. We parked at the trailhead in the late afternoon, pale light already bleeding from the sky. The snow was fresh, crunching beneath our boots as we hauled our gear into the forest. Marcus moved with the easy stride of someone who belonged there, adjusting his pack like second nature. I trailed behind, lungs burning in the cold, my breath rising in quick white clouds. That's when I saw them. Footprints, they weren't ours. They were bigger, pressed deep into the snow, leading the same direction we were heading. Probably hunters, Marcus said when I pointed them out. His voice was casual, but I noticed the way his eyes lingered on the tracks a beat too long before moving on. I tried to convince myself it was normal. Public land. Other people hiked these woods all the time, but a part of me couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't just walking a trail, we were following someone's path. By the time we set up camp, the sky was already turning bruised purple. Marcus got the fire going, and for a little while, everything felt like it always had. We roasted hot dogs, told the same dumb high school stories we told a dozen times, laughed at things that weren't funny anymore but still felt comforting. The fire was warm, the woods quiet, until the scream. It cut through the night like a blade. Sharp, human. My hot dog slipped from my hand, hissing as it sank into the snow. "Tell me that was an animal," I whispered. Marcus forced a laugh. "Cougar, maybe." They scream like people sometimes, but his laugh cracked and my gut told me the truth. That wasn't an animal. That was someone. The fire suddenly felt too small, too weak, like it couldn't hold the darkness back. We tried to shrug it off, pretend it was nothing. But minutes later came another sound, footsteps in the snow. Slow, heavy, deliberate. Marcus leaned in, voice tight. "Grab the knife." I pulled a small hunting blade from my pack, suddenly aware of how pathetic it felt in my hand. My palm was slick with sweat despite the cold. "Hello?" I called, voice breaking. "Anyone out there?" Silence. The woods felt like they were holding their breath. Marcus grabbed the flashlight. "We can't just sit here." Better to know what it is every step away from the fire felt wrong. My boots crunched in the snow, flashlight beams slicing through the trees. 50 yards from camp, we found it. A deer carcass. Its stomach had been ripped open, blood frozen into black crystals against the snow. I gagged, yanking my scarf over my mouth. But what made my stomach twist wasn't the deer. It was the boot prints around it. They didn't lead anywhere. They just circled, like someone had been standing there, watching. Marcus swung the light across the tree line. That's when I saw him, a man. He wasn't hiding, he wasn't moving, just standing among the pines, staring. No hunter's jacket, no orange vest, just dark clothing that seemed to drink the light. "Hey," Marcus shouted, though his voice shook. "What the hell are you doing out here?" The man didn't answer, didn't flinch, just stared. Cold seeped into my bones. "We need to go," I muttered. We stumbled back to camp, hands clumsy as we shoved gear into our packs. All the while, footsteps echoed just beyond the firelight, circling us. Packing felt endless. My fingers fumbled at zippers, trembling so hard I could barely pull them shut. "Move," Marcus hissed, shoving a bag into my arms. We doused the fire. The sudden darkness hit like a punch to the chest. Our flashlights bounced wildly through the trees as we hurried toward the trail. Behind us, the crunch of footsteps followed. He wasn't even trying to be quiet. Whoever he was, He wanted us to know he was there. "Don't look back," Marcus said, low and urgent. But I did. Between the trees, a shape kept pace with us, not close enough to see his face, but close enough that he wanted us to know he could. My chest burned. My breaths came ragged, stabbing at my lungs. I clutched the knife, knowing it wouldn't save me. The truck appeared like salvation, headlights glinting pale in the distance. Relief surged through me so hard I almost stumbled. Then Marcus froze. On the windshield, written in the condensation with a finger, were words, "You don't belong here." The world tilted. My stomach dropped. Marcus swore under his breath, fumbling with the keys. I nearly dropped my flashlight, trying to help. We threw ourselves inside, slammed the doors, engine roaring. The woods around us had gone silent, as if they'd swallowed him whole. The drive back was wordless. Marcus gripped the wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. I sat rigid, the knife still clutched in my lap. When we finally pulled into my driveway, neither of us moved. We just sat there, the tick of the cooling engine loud in the silence. "What the hell was that?" I whispered. Marcus stared straight ahead. "Doesn't matter. We're not talking about it." But I couldn't stop. The scream, the deer, the man, the message on the glass. They replayed in my mind like a broken record. That night, every creak of my house sounded like footsteps in the snow. Every shadow looked like him, standing, watching. The next morning, I told Marcus we needed to tell someone. The cops, rangers, anybody. "And tell them what?" he snapped. "That we saw some guy in the woods? They'll laugh in our faces. Forget it." His voice was sharp, final. So I tried. But forgetting isn't the same as healing. Months passed. Winter gave way to spring. Life carried on. I went back to the machine shop, grinding through long days. Marcus kept his ranger job, posting photos of hikes online like nothing had happened. But we never went camping again. I couldn't. The thought of a tent in the woods made my chest lock up. Even a fishing trip by the river felt impossible. Marcus tried once to convince me it was just some crazy guy. It won't happen again. But I saw it in his eyes. The flicker, the way he looked past me instead of at me. He was as scared as I was, and even now, all these years later, I still hear it sometimes. Not in dreams, not in nightmare, just in the quiet moments when the world is still. That scream, sharp and human, echoing in the back of my mind. I used to think the wilderness meant freedom, but now I know better. Out there, freedom doesn't exist, only fear.